On my hand here is the latest Canon 85mm lens. This is the 85mm f2 macro IS STM lens for the RF mount. It mounts on the R5, R6 and of course the C70 Cine cameras. I'm Richard and welcome to ZP Productions, and today on my hand here is the latest 85mm lens in the market, the 85mm f2 for the RF system. Now this lens is something that many people are looking forward to because it is an affordable lens for the R mount, and I think that for the price of 600 USD, many people who are doing portraiture is definitely looking forward to this lens because it doesn't require an adapter, it is relatively light at 500 grams and doesn't cost too much at 600 USD. Now this lens is very rare still because it is very new, so my retailer SLR Revolution was kind enough to loan me this copy here. I have to thank them for it so that I can actually bring you this review itself. Now if this is the first time you are looking at my channel, I'm a portrait photographer, so normally I bring lenses like this out in the field and shoot portraits with it. But because I just got it from my retailer today and the time is really very late at night, I only can do some synthetic tests and of course shooting the night buildings to show you the things like CA and general sharpness of the lens. If you're going to buy this lens in the next few days, it will definitely be a useful video for you to watch. If not, you can actually wait till next week. I have a full review of it. However, today's content, I'll try not to cover it next week so I can actually create a nice short video and you can just watch both of them together. So firstly, let's talk about its build quality of the lens. Now, this is a mid-range lens of 600 USD. It is not very heavy, of 500 grams. And the build quality actually carries through. It is not very lousy in build quality, but it's also not very premium in any way. Of course, if you compare to the RF 85 1.2, it is very premium here. But this one feels about just nice for the price range. Very similar to the 35mm f1.8 if you own it before. The only thing that bothered me is that there is some play and shake in the front extending barrel. Because this is a macro lens, the barrel in front do extend like the 35 1.8, and this barrel has some play in it, and if you shake it around you can actually feel that play, which actually bothers me a little. Now the front barrel is of course glass inside, and you can see that this glass with the filter thread of 67mm is about this size. It's not very big, not very small, feels about okay. And the back of it, if you can see, there is no rubber gasket. So Canon is telling you that this is not a weather sealed lens in any way. And because of its no rubber gasket behind, and of course, extendable barrel with a little bit of play, I will say as the build quality of this lens tells me that I should not bring it into the rain or into very dusty conditions because things will probably get in some way, one way or another. Just to note, that is my personal feel of this lens here. Now, with any RF lens, of course, there is two rings, one for the focus and one for the control. And the focus ring is, of course, really smooth with no hard ends. Personally, for RF glass, I rarely use the focus ring because, it is a focus by wire, so the tactile feeling is quite bad. And the control ring is very nice and clicky. So for photography purpose, it's very nice because you can do very good discrete stepping of your aperture and shutter. However, if you're using it for video, I don't think you'll like it because it's really loud, as you can hear in this video here. Now, this RF glass has a little bit more switch than normal because it has IS, it has macro. So first thing is a focus limitation switch. Allows you to actually focus everything, or if not, just things from the macro range or above the macro range. Next is the AF/MF switch here. And this is to just give you AF/MF. And for macro lens, that will actually be quite important. Lastly, it has an IS switch because this lens has a built-in IS. The only thing I don't like about Canon is because this switch controls the entire IS for the lens and the camera. There is no way to discretely just use the camera or just the lens itself. A bit disappointing because sometimes the body may actually be a better choice, or at least you give an option to test out which is a better choice for you. Now, if you are using the EOS R or the C70 with no IS in any way, I think the inbuilt IS and this IS switch will definitely be useful for you, especially if you go on tripod, you want to deactivate this switch itself. And that's about it for the physical build of this lens. Overall, mid-range lens, just note the play in the barrel itself. Next, I'll talk about the IS, and this lens IS is pretty okay. It doesn't feel any better than the inbuilt image stabilization with any non-stabilized lens, at least for mid-range. You can see in these shots here at 1.5 of shutter, it seems to be about the same, about 30-40%. And at 1/10 of shutter, you get about maybe 80-90% in terms of image stabilization. However, for Infinity, I did notice that it is better because I was doing this night scenery shoot because I want to test its chromatic aberrations. And I did notice that for the 3 shots that I shot at 1.5 of shutter, all of them were decently sharp. So overall, I think that the combination of the lens and the body IS is very good for infinity, but below infinity, it doesn't seem to be much different compared to a lens with no IS mounted on the R5. Seems to be about the same. Now, I don't want to talk so much about autofocus because this is a macro lens. It will be slightly slower, and because the Canon already said that this is a STM lens, it is slower in nature by STM motto. The STM motto is a stepper motto that is slower than, of course, the USMs. Now, one thing to note, because it's a macro lens, right? The macro range actually extends and move a lot, while the rest of the range actually move really little. I have to bring it out in the field to really see how it performs as a portrait lens in the field. Because if I was just to show you a video here, it will look really slow. As you can see, the barrel does extend significantly. That's about it for the image stabilization and autofocus. The next thing I'll talk about is, of course, the image quality of this lens. First, let's talk about its macro capabilities. This lens is a macro lens with a 0.5 times macro capability, and you can see it goes quite close. Not only does it go quite close, it's actually quite sharp too. If you look at the f2 shot here, if I zoom in at the sharpest area, it actually looks really nicely detailed for f2 shot. Now, if you actually look at its f2.8, it's even sharper. But just to note that because this is ultimately a macro shot, and at f2 or f2.8, I think depth of field is a bigger problem than the sharpness of the lens, and you'll probably need to step down to f8 and f11, and at those ranges, diffraction is the bigger problem than the lens sharpness itself. Other than the macro shot, I did this particular night shot to test certain of its image quality. Firstly, when it comes to chromatic aberration, this lens does have it. It is reddish purple rather than the bluish purple you see in Tamron or Sigma, and this chromatic aberration is actually quite obvious. However, if you compare it side by side with the Tamron, it isn't any worse. In fact, if you compare side by side with the Sigma, it also isn't any worse. So pretty much just prepare yourself that this is not the most perfect lens, unlike the 85 1.2, but it isn't any worse off than the competitors. Next, we'll talk about the sharpness of this lens, and you can see in the center versus the Tamron, it looks equally sharp, or in fact, slightly sharper and clearer than the Tamron itself. Now, if you actually move all the way to the corner and edges, it doesn't look as sharp. So I'm not sure whether is this lens sharper in the center and less sharp at the corner. I have to wait until the morning to test out with the buildings in bright daylight with extremely high shutter, so that you can actually remove things like image stabilization and shutter shock from the equation of the shot itself. Next, we'll look at the shape of the lights itself. In the center, it's okay. Off center is still pretty much fine, but at the very corner, it looks like some weird bird rotating 90 degrees. So that is something to note if you're going to use this lens at f2 and shoot at night, because you will probably get that funny shape of light, especially at the very, very corner itself. And that's about it for the test that I did so far today. In my final concluding thoughts is that this lens here seems to be a very, very good lens if you're using the EOS R system or maybe even the C70. Firstly, I would say as the price is really good. 600 USD makes it even lower than the Tamron by 100 over USD. And at least when it comes to image quality so far, it seems to be very, very comparable. And not only that, it is more compact, it is lighter, and there is no need for adapter. So when you mount it on the R5, it is a very, very good and small solution. Now, if you are looking for a short telephoto portrait prime lens, you may want to wait until my next week review, but at least in my initial test so far, it looks to be very sharp and overall quite good. So I have to test it outdoor to see things like its bokeh, and of course, is there any form of hazing and any problems in the field itself. But so far, it seems to be shaping up to be a very, very good lens itself. However, if you have not purchased this lens and looking to have a more conclusive review, I would recommend you to wait for next week when I actually conclude my findings for this particular lens, especially when I bring it out for a photo shoot. Because like the Tamron itself, when I go out in the field itself, things like autofocus, the absolute sharpness may actually be very different from synthetic tests. And that's something I'm looking forward to test with this particular lens. And I hope you enjoy this really short review, because I want to bring you this particular review as soon as possible. And I'm pretty sure that some of you may be actually looking to buy this lens in the next few days. I hope this actually helps you out to make a decision. If not, wait till next week. A full review will be up. Until then, bye-bye.